Well, I think we'll jump into the program now. It's 2 minutes after. Thanks to everybody who's joined. Welcome to the Green Ribbon Commission Climate Action Exchange. My name is John Cleveland, along with my colleague Amy. We staff the GRC. This is our interactive virtual program series, which supports our mission of accelerating the implementation of the city's climate action plan. Today, we're going to focus on the opportunities presented by the decarbonization of our city district energy systems. These systems provide thermal services to almost 90 million square feet of floor space in the city. The two largest systems, Vicinity, Steam's network, and ENGIE's Maytef facility, they count for like 80% of this energy generation, with the rest of it coming from independent systems. As most of us know, from a carbon perspective, these systems they're pretty efficient. They take advantage of cogeneration or trigeneration, but they're all powered by fossil fuels. And in some cases, the customers to the systems are locked into this fossil generation through 2050, which is the date by which we're supposed to hit carbon neutrality. So it'll really not be possible for Boston to achieve its carbon neutrality goal without some clear decarbonization pathways for these district systems. Of course, one of the great opportunities with these systems, since they are so large, is to do what you might think about as a wholesale as opposed to a retail decarbonization strategy. You know, if we can take any one of these systems, say the Vicinity network, for example, if we can flip a switch and decarbonize that system, we've suddenly in one fell swoop decarbonized 60 million square feet of space. Much faster, cheaper, less disruptive than going on a building by building basis. So, you know, that's the opportunity that matches the challenges. We've got a great panel today to guide us through this complex issue. Rebecca Hatchadorian, Associate Principal with Sustainability Consultant with Arup, is going to lead us off. In addition to her 15 years of sustainability consulting experience, Rebecca has really deep experience with our Boston context. She led the Carbon-Free Boston building modeling for that report. She supported the Massachusetts Decarbonization Roadmap and was worked with the city of Cambridge on their climate plan. In addition, Arup has worked on district energy systems and system decarbonization in multiple regions of the world. Rebecca's going to give us what you might think about as sort of the district energy system 101, which will explain what the benefits are of district systems and how they can bring those benefits to decarbonization. So this will just help create a framework for our deep dive into Boston systems. Next up is going to be Bill DiCroce, President and CEO of Vicinity Energy, and I should also mention a long-term GRC member. Thank you, Bill, for your leadership on the Green Ribbon Commission. As President and CEO of Vicinity, Bill leads the largest district energy portfolio in North America. And in Boston, this includes thermal services to 60 million square feet of space. So this is a really huge and important system. He was previously the President and CEO of Veolia North America, which owned the Vicinity system before it was spun out. And it's also worth noting that before joining Veolia, he was the president and COO of the company that owned and operated Maytef. So he has deep experience in all of Boston's core district energy systems. And as many of you know, Vicinity recently made a public commitment to decarbonize its operations by 2050. So what Bill's going to share is Vicinity's vision for how they're going to execute on this commitment in Boston and what its implications are for our city's carbon neutrality goal. Now, not all district systems are big commercial systems that serve outside players. Many are owned by organizations, but they present the same kind of decarbonization challenges as the large systems. The Carbon-Free Boston report estimated that as much as 25% of the city's district systems are operated by property owners, and we're going to hear from two of them. First up is going to be Bob Biggio, Senior Vice President of Facilities and Support Services with the Boston Medical Center. Bob led BMC's $300 million campus redesign project, which fully modernized its campus and has put BMC on a pace to be net zero for greenhouse gas emissions from all sources of energy, a real leader in the healthcare sector. His leadership was able to produce over $40 million of annual operating savings for BMC in a time frame when their patient volumes grew by more than 20%, not a trivial accomplishment. So Bob's going to share a quick overview on how the redesign of their energy system fit into their decarbonization strategy. Next is going to be Maria Cimilluca, who's Vice President of Facilities for Northeastern University. They're one of the largest property owners in the city, and they also have the city's largest institutional district energy system, serving close to 5 million square feet of buildings. Maria is leading the university's total redesign of its campus energy system, which is a great opportunity to integrate district generation, on-site, off-site renewables, energy efficiency, and storage into a really comprehensive system that can support their goal of net zero emissions by 2050. And then last but not least is a good friend of all of us, Brad Swing, Director of Energy Policy and Programs with the City of Boston. Brad's been with the city, I think he's told us earlier, almost 30 years. And he started Boston's energy program. He created the municipal energy unit, and he oversees Boston's energy activities in general. He's also led the city's work on district systems, including the development of the Smart Utilities Program, which is administered by the Boston Planning and Development Agency. Brad is going to explain how the district energy systems fit into the city's plan for a building emissions performance standard that will require buildings of over 20,000 square feet, including those served by DE systems, to hit specific decarbonization targets between now and 2050. After the presentations, we'll probably have about 20 minutes for Q&A. If you have questions for the panelists, please put them in the chat box. We'll remind everybody about this a couple of different times, and then I'll be drawing from the chat box to moderate the Q&A session. A couple other quick logistical notes before I turn it over to Rebecca. We are recording this session. Shortly after it, you'll get an email with a link to the recording and to the slides. I'll also include a link to a short feedback survey, which we hope you'll fill out. And last but not least, of course, please mute yourself when you're not speaking. So with that, Rebecca, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thanks, John. So hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. As John kind of framed up, I'm here just to kind of set the context and give a very brief introduction to district energy systems and why we're talking about them in the context of decarbonization. If we go ahead one. So as hopefully everyone's aware, both the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and the City of Boston have their commitments to decarbonize at least 50% by 2030 and be carbon neutral by 2050. So at the end of 2020, the Commonwealth released its Decarbonization Roadmap, which outlines the pathways to reach its decarbonization goals. And more recently, the climate bill that Governor Baker signed has codified those commitments, as well as, very importantly, establishing interim targets on a 5-year basis for the Commonwealth to hit, and that includes subsector targets as well. And so when we're talking about district energy systems, we really need real and scalable solutions and not just incremental reductions anymore in emissions associated with those systems. And so we really want that John started to frame up the opportunities that these systems present in being able, because of their reach and the amount of buildings that they serve. And so they do have great potential to realize emission savings reductions at scale without many different actors needing to act. But there are some challenges, as we'll start to frame up and hear about today, and how we do that. If you go forward one, it's and kind of scaling down even more specifically, the City of Boston, this is also very relevant to the conversation today that building owners are having. In January of this year, the city released a draft policy for its building energy reporting and disclosure ordinance to amend it to set a building emissions performance standard that individual buildings or portfolios of buildings need to meet incrementally on a 5-year basis as early as starting in 2025. So buildings and owners that are connected to district systems need to start looking at their emissions and making sure that they are meeting the city's reduction targets that incrementally decline starting in 2025 and going to zero. And what we start to see is in the city's climate action plan is that to date, the largest source of reductions to date has been related to energy supply, whether that's in cleaner electricity or in the chart below, you can see cleaner steam is also a pretty big contributor in the context of the city's overall emissions profile. So these systems have great opportunity again, and that's why we're talking about them today. If we move forward one. So when we are talking about district energy, what are we actually talking about? We wanted to just kind of start to level set with everyone. So we are talking about centralized generation and consumption of heating, cooling energy, and potentially electricity. And so it could be any combination. So there can be just district heating systems, just district cooling systems. There can be combined heat and power systems. And these systems also can operate as a microgrid, and we'll go into just briefly explain what that means. And so these systems, these centralized generation systems, distribute thermal energy and potentially electricity to buildings, whether it be on a campus scale, a neighborhood, or even a larger kind of city scale. If we go to the next slide. And we really want to make sure, when we're talking about district energy and when we talk about energy, hopefully folks are familiar with this notion of the energy trilemma. And these are the drivers here are very relevant to district energy systems as well. And so it's about finding solutions that balance not only the environmental or sustainability benefits in the context of decarbonization and also air quality and health benefits, but we can't ignore the cost considerations and affordability, as well as, especially with the context of the Vicinity and Maytap systems, the reliability and resilience of the energy systems, because they become increasingly critical when they're serving cannot fail types of buildings, such as hospitals and critical research. If we go forward. And so we wanted to just start again, at this District Energy 101 level, start to talk about the benefits to district energy systems, because there are many. So first and foremost, they provide immense energy efficiency on kind of multiple levels. And so when we're looking at traditional power plants that are generating electricity, they're extremely inefficient. So they're only converting, at most 40% of that input energy into electricity, while 60% roughly is really rejected or waste heat. And so what district energy systems allow us to do is to capture that waste heat and use it so that it isn't wasted. So you get the efficiencies there. It also allows, because you're serving multiple buildings and a larger district, it also allows you to thermally balance at that central generation facility, so you're able to share and recover all of the heat across that network. If we go forward one more. And so because of the ability to serve multiple uses and a diversity of uses, there's generally, we see a lower total installed capacity on the heating and cooling side. Whether you look on the left side is just a diagram without district energy, if each individual building was having their own thermal energy generation. And on the right-hand side is starting to suggest that with district energy, hopefully you can see at the bottom, there is much less installed capacity, because you're able to take advantage of diversities in loads across different use types. We move forward one. And then at an individual building level, there are real tangible benefits. So number one, there's significant space savings. If you are connected to a district energy system, you don't have to have significant amount of equipment and space take within your building. And because you're not installing all of that equipment yourself, we do also see initial capital cost savings at the individual building level, which can be real money to the owners. If we move forward one. We also wanted to hit again on the resilience of energy supply and the benefits that they provide. Most of these systems are are using natural gas in terms of supply, which is a reliable energy supply. And coupled with that is these systems also allow you to better manage demand management and potentially coupled with storage to again, reduce peak emissions associated with loads at the demand side. If we go forward one. And what we also start to see with district energy systems is a lower total cost of ownership. And again, this is just a diagram to kind of illustrate the point, but as we've said, you start to see, again, a great efficiency in terms of overall fuel cost that is highly related to the energy efficiency of these systems. So when you're putting 1 unit of energy in, you're getting as many as 3 units of usable energy out of those systems. Likewise, the next kind of blue bar up, you start to see significant savings on overall operations and maintenance of these systems. One of the trade-offs is because of the scale of these systems and the distribution networks, they do have a larger kind of CapEx. But it's more than offset when you look in terms of the total cost of ownership of these systems. If we move forward, which is why we have a lot of them. So those are just kind of at a high level, a lot of the benefits that we see for district energy systems. And so now we wanted to start to describe a little bit more about what these look like. And so district energy systems have been around for a long time. And as we start to see, the systems that we'll be hearing about today are really in the 3rd and kind of even potentially starting to look at the 4th generation, especially when we're in the context of decarbonizing these district energy systems. If you move forward one. So the first is combined heat and power. And so you might have also heard of this as cogeneration or trigeneration. And really what's happening here is the captured, you're able to use the waste heat from electricity generation and start to use that waste heat in your steam system. So that rejected heat is converted to either steam, hot water, or chilled water, again, as usable energy to distribute to buildings. So the diagram at the right is starting to show how, again, just at a very high level, how this works. So individual buildings can be using not only steam for heating, but potentially also for their cooling needs, as well as potentially getting electricity from that district system. We move forward one. We will be hearing later from Bill about Vicinity's steam system, but it is one of these combined heat and power district energy systems that is producing steam as well as electricity. What's a little bit unique about how this plant operates is it really is just distributing steam to the end customers at buildings. The electricity is not actually distributed to customers. As John mentioned, the system is quite sizable. So it is serving about 64 million square feet in Boston and Cambridge. Just to give a sense of scale of that, if it was all on the Boston side, that's roughly 10% of the city's square footage. So again, the opportunity for impact and decarbonization is really great here. If we move forward one. We also wanted to just very quickly describe the trigeneration side. So when we're looking at not only providing steam or thermal energy and electricity, there's also creation of or distribution of chilled water. So again, 1 unit of energy in and potentially as many as those 3 units of energy out. If we go forward one. And this is, we also wanted to frame up what a district energy microgrid is. And so in many cases, it is that trigeneration system. The thing that makes it unique is that these microgrids are also able to disconnect from the larger utility grid. And so they can operate independently they're generally connected to the overall electricity grid, but can operate completely independently of that grid. And so the resilience and reliability of these district energy microgrids is one of the biggest benefits of a microgrid. If we move forward, and that's really how the MATEP, sorry, go ahead, one more. If we move forward, that's also how MATEP operates. So it is a combined cooling, heat, and power plant, or that it is providing the trigeneration, but it is also a district energy microgrid. And so it is serving 74 buildings, approximately 12 million square feet, predominantly of hospitals and critical research facilities. If we move forward one. And so I'm just in terms of this discussion on district energy systems and decarbonization, as John mentioned, these systems are very, very energy efficient, but they are currently fossil fuel based, predominantly using natural gas to generate that electricity, some fuel oil. And so as we're looking at decarbonization and the electricity grid does continue on long term to get cleaner, generating electricity from natural gas does become less appealing to customers. And so similarly, steam needs for specialty uses are harder to generate with our traditional kind of all electric toolkit. So that need for steam is also one of the biggest challenges when we look at decarbonizing these district energy systems. If we go to the next slide, there's a lot on it, but when we start to look at what these decarbonization pathways are for district systems, there are a lot of options, and it's really about figuring out for that particular district energy system, what is the right kit of parts in order to do that. So first on the steam decarbonization, the easiest thing would be to have that drop-in fuel that isn't natural gas and isn't a fuel oil, whether that be hydrogen, or we'll hear a little bit more about what Vicinity's working on there, since you don't need to really change any of your distribution network. And you're able to decarbonize. Many systems at a campus level, I would say, have been looking at converting those district steam systems into hydronic or water-based networks, and there's challenges with that transition from steam to hot water, even if it is medium or low temperature hot water. The benefit there is that it is easier to generate lower temperature water with a wider array of kit of parts, and that's where you start to see on B. And some systems are even looking at becoming what is called an ambient loop. So not just a traditional kind of heating network or cooling network, but kind of an ambient temperature level so that buildings are either taking heat or rejecting heat into that same network. So again, taking advantage of that diversity of loads and really starting to share energy between buildings, which greatly reduces the amount of generation needed. And so there is a big toolkit, but on the drop-in fuels, one of the biggest challenges is really on supply at this stage and reliable supply. And with that, I think I will say thank you and hand it over to Bill to hear about the exciting pathway that Vicinity has on its decarbonization.
Great, thanks, Rebecca. Really appreciate you just giving us that basic framing, the 101, as you said, level setting. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Bill.
So thank you, Rebecca. Great job. Well, by the way, we're always looking for very talented people. So you did a fantastic job on that. Anyway, with that, we'll proceed. If you could advance a slide, please. So just to frame up our business, I think you guys did a great job at it, but we touch 65 million square feet in Boston. When you look at our networks around the country, all east of the Mississippi, it's close to 250 million square feet we touch. And then if you look at the amount of districts around the nation, there's thousands. Any really urban cores, campuses, military bases. So the opportunity, if we can get this right, is dramatic and can be very quick. So in our case, 65 million square feet is like 65 Prudential towers. Think of it that way, because the PRU is about 1 million square feet. We have 26 miles of underground piping that is super robust infrastructure. So it's very resilient. For example, in the case where we don't want it, but if there's a flooding event, flooding doesn't bother our pipes. We have to turn the system off, but we can restore very quickly. If we had a major flood, within 12 hours, we could be back on. So it's very resilient infrastructure. And then today already, just by the use of our CHP plant, our combined heat and power plant at Kendall Station, we avoid 165,000 tons of carbon a year. It's New England's largest combined heat and power plant. So compared to alternative generation, conventional generation with power plants and gas-fired heating equipment, we're already green. But we're going to talk now about how we're going to get much greener. So if you can advance, please. So there's a long history, I think, as Rebecca positioned it well. Think of district energy as two pieces. One is the distribution network. The other is the generating the energy source. They're separate, really. Think of it that way. Steam is just like electricity. It's a thermal energy transportation product. It moves energy around just like electrons move energy around. It's not a fuel. So the front end of the plant has changed over time. Many of these legacy districts, big urban core districts, were built back in the day, and they were coal-fired. And then, in the 50s, it went to oil-fired. In 1990 timeframe, that era, many converted to gas. And then in our case, we then converted to combined heat and power with gas. So there's a long history of basically changing out the front end, the primary fuel source, as time changes. So that's where we are. We're at that next inflection point to figure out how do we swap out that primary fuel source so that we can decarbonize rapidly. Because remember, with that touch of 65 million square feet, if we can do it at our plant, our 1 or 2 plants, all that 65 million square feet and growing gets the benefit of it. So it really can be dramatic. So I'm going to talk a little bit about where we are this year and where we're going to be from now through 2050. We issued a net zero plan out through 2050 back in last fall, but I can tell you we've got a lot of stuff that's going to happen quickly by say 2030 or even sooner. So let's I'll kind of walk through a bit of that. So if you take a look at our system, again, it's plug and play. So what can we plug in and play with? So for example, this year we just announced signing a deal with a company that collects vegetable oil from basically the restaurant and food industry. We will completely eliminate our use of heating oil. We don't use much. We about 1 to 2% of our annual energy needs are supplied from heating oil. So it's a backup fuel for resiliency. And in cases when gas prices really spike, we may run our oil-fired equipment. So even though it's 1 to 2%, that's 1.5 million gallons a year of oil that we burn. We're going to eliminate that. So we've signed this deal. We're doing it in both Boston and Philadelphia. It's a net carbon zero fuel. It's basically vegetable oil. And from now on, when you're out in Boston and you indulge in some French fries, you can do it with a little less guilt, because we're going to collect, our partner is collecting that oil through a collection network. They then process it, purify it in some respects so that we can burn it in our boilers. And frankly, we don't have to do a thing to our plant. Very minor modifications to our plants. And from a permitting perspective, it's quite easy because it's carbon free. So that's this year. By next winter, we will not burn any liquid heating oil. We'll be all in this biogenic fuel. So that's an early step today. It's happening. We've already permitted, we've tested in all our equipment, and we'll begin burning it this year to eliminate heating oil. But now the next one I really want to talk about is electrification. And this is the dramatic one. So I think really because of the state and the city's leadership in pushing us in the direction of electrifying, the notion is we need infrastructure that can use, when you look forward in time between large scale hydro and offshore wind, we're going to have a fair amount, a large amount of renewable power that should be reasonably affordable, as we saw in the case of like Texas, when Texas installed a lot of wind capacity. So the state and the city started pushing us, and we basically rethought of ourselves. So if you look at Kendall Station, which is it's the largest combined heat and power plant in New England. It's a 300 megawatt substation today. Now the difference is today we burn natural gas in our combined heat and power plant. We make electricity, we put it onto the grid. But as we thought about this, we said, wait a minute, we can do the opposite. We can take power off the grid and electrify our system. And the more we thought about it, and we've now studied this for about 6 months, it really becomes the easy button to electrify our system. And I'll go into that a little bit more. So we already have the high voltage transmission interconnect because of our power plant. We already have the huge substation in place that gives us access to wholesale power because we're on the high voltage system. And we already have 26 miles of energy distribution. So what do you need to plug in the middle? You plug in electric boilers. So we've already studied this at our plant. We have the floor plan that will support it. We can put in large scale electric boilers that will convert electricity to steam, and they're 100% efficient. So basically all the energy that goes in from electrons comes out the other end of steam. There's no loss, there's no stack. It's a direct conversion. So that would dramatically allow us to decarbonize our system. Okay, so what's the hitch, right? Sounds too good to be true. Part of the challenge, as we know today, is natural gas is cheap and electricity is more expensive, okay? One thing to consider though, in our case, we'll be buying wholesale, so we already have an advantage there. So we've taken a look at how we can stage this. So although we have the capacity for 300 megawatts, which can basically carry all of our load, so the entire thermal load of our system, we can electrify. But economics, they tell part of the tale. So our first step will be to install around 50 megawatts of electric capacity. So to electrify that portion of our steam load. And what we'll do is, and again, we've already studied this, we'll go out and power scavenge. We'll go out and buy power, renewable power, basically whenever it's available at the right price. And we've already studied that we can support about 50 megawatts just from scavenging what's out there on the grid at the odd times a day where it's produced, where there isn't electrical load. So that's part of the challenge. You're always trying to match generation with load. And if the profiles don't match, then you have a challenge. Well, in our case, since we have such a big thermal load, we can just turn our electric boiler on and off whenever the power is there and it's cheap enough. So it's going to give us an initial step, which will, first of all, demonstrate our ability to electrify. Secondly, for some early adopters on our system, we'll provide an opportunity for people to contract to have that electrified steam. So in other words, we'll attribute the benefit of that carbon reduction to early adopting customers. Over time, and as you look at the profile of when offshore wind becomes available, we just scale up. So as the power becomes available at the pricing points, and between the pricing points that exist today or are predicted to exist and policy moves, because the city and the state are, they're serious about this. So there's going to be some penalties associated with if people don't convert. So I think between policy incentives, maybe some challenge, some, if you will, penalties if you don't try to convert, I think we'll be in a position between that and offshore wind becoming available to rapidly electrify. So that 50 megawatts, if you look out, say through 2025 through 2030, I think will rapidly increase as all those kind of conditions come together. So we'll be in a position shortly with our infrastructure to basically have early adoption at that first bite of electrification and then ramp up quickly after that. So now what else are we doing? Okay, so we've really re-examined ourselves. So the next thing that we're looking at is heat pumps. So you might say, well, what do you mean, Bill? Heat pumps in your system, they don't scale. Well, in fact, there are industrial heat pumps all over Europe. The largest of which we found is in Malmo, Sweden. It's a 40 megawatt heat pump. It's multiple stages and it uses very exotic refrigerants because heat pumps, without getting into the details, can only lift the temperature so much. There's just physics involved here around the refrigerants and around the outside air temperature, or if you're using ground sources, and then ultimately you're trying to heat a building. So you're trying to get air hot enough to heat a building. So there's some limits. But with some of these new, very new industrial scale heat pumps, with using refrigerants like hexane or pentane, we can do that in an industrial facility. You're not going to have those type of refrigerants in a commercial office tower, but we can do it in an industrial facility. So what we're going to look at next is a large heat pump to preheat our feed water in our combined heat and power plant. So today we have to preheat the feed water before it goes into the boilers of the combined heat and power plant. And that's about 10 to 15% of our total methane burn. So what we'll do is we will install this heat pump. We'll steal energy from the Charles River, thermal energy, and we will preheat our feed water. That move in and of itself will reduce carbon between 25 and 30,000 tons per year. And that's independent of the other electrification play. So we'll be doing the electrification play to buy wholesale power, convert it into steam and distribute it. We're also going to install industrial scale heat pump and just steal energy out of the Charles River. Why not? It'll be free. So in the case of these fuels, what's nice about renewable fuels is basically wind, sunlight, and natural energy and ground source or in a river. It's there for the taking. So that's the next step. Beyond that, it gets a little more difficult. So all this can happen quickly. We're talking all of this before 2030, let's say. I mean, we could have electric boilers installed in between 2 and 3 years, and we will. The next steps are large scale other fuels, right? Replacement fuels. So hydrogen, renewable natural gas. The challenge there is pricing and availability, but we're going to enter into a pilot with GE on hydrogen blending into our combined heat and power plant. So again, that's done in many facilities today in industrial sites where there actually is hydrogen generation and they'll use it for their own purposes. But we'll be in a position where we can test out our CHP with a blend of methane and hydrogen, again, because we're bridging to the future. We're trying to find, while we can do some things quickly, others are going to take a while. We're going to bridge, as everyone knows. The spigot on methane isn't going to get turned off in 5 years, but we've got to take these moves so that we can, shorten the length of that bridge, if you will. We're trying to get to a renewable future faster, but on the way, we'll cross over the bridge. Another key element for us is energy storage. So in this case where we're electrifying, while we have the ability to match loads pretty well with particularly offshore wind, because the offshore wind peak happens to be in the winter, exactly when the thermal loads are highest. But having large-scale battery storage basically is where you dial it in. So we will install large-scale batteries in our facility, and that will allow us to optimize our dispatch. So we can buy power when it's available, store it, and then convert it into steam when we need it. To just do that final kind of tuning, that matching of load and primary energy source. The end game for us is carbon-based dispatch. So what does that mean? That means when renewable power is available, we buy it, we convert it, whether directly or through storage, through batteries, into steam. When it's not available, we'll still use the CHP to some extent, but it'll probably be dispatched very little. One of the challenges with the grid is you still need dispatchable assets. And everybody who understands the grid knows that look, the sun doesn't shine sometimes and it goes that, the earth turns and the wind doesn't blow. So you still need dispatchable assets. So the end game for us will be the vast majority of our energy needs will be supplied from renewable power from the grid, or in a small amount from biogenics, or maybe some other fuels. But the CHP will still be sitting there, probably not running a lot, but when it's needed, it can run. So that's what we call carbon-based dispatch of our generating assets, and that's the future. So we'll have that resiliency associated with having a very large natural gas-fired electrical generation equipment that doesn't run much, but sitting there, and the balance of our needs will be supplied through, mostly renewables or some biogenics and hopefully some, future fuels. So that's really kind of our path forward. I don't want to dive too far into the details, but as you can see, when we really rethought about ourselves with this push towards electrification, we can be the easy button. For this 65 million square feet that's attached to us, deep building retrofits to try to say install heat pumps are very difficult. They're expensive. And then the electricity to run those is very expensive. At a fraction of that cost, we can convert at our facility and our customers don't have to do a thing. Zero. No modifications to their building. So if they want to take their capital on other environmental attributes, whether it's improving the skin of their building or energy efficiency of their building, they can spend their money elsewhere. They won't have to spend it on electrification because we'll do it for them. So I think that is you can advance the slide. There you go. So that's my story. I think it's a pretty exciting time for us. Certainly entertain questions. And, we've had advanced conversations with both the state and the city. This is new for us. A year ago, we couldn't have told this story, frankly, but we took the last year to really study it, and now we're going to leap forward. So with that, thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, Bill. That's a really exciting story to listen to. And I do want to continue to urge the folks listening in to put your questions for Bill or for Rebecca or for any of the other speakers as they come up into the chat box so we can take care of them at the end. With that, Bob, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, John. I think Bill's overview really highlighted just how important it is that we continue to work with our utility partners. And BMC has been on its journey of carbon reduction now for about a decade. And really from the beginning, we've done our work very closely, working with Vicinity as well as Eversource. And it's truly been critical to the success we've had, because you really can't plan what types of investments you need to make within your buildings without understanding what the fuel sources that will be providing the energy into the building will look like in the future. And so this dialogue with Bill, as well as Eversource, has been going on here at BMC really for a number of years. Next slide. If you go back to the beginning of our journey in 2010, 2011, BMC was looking at installing a large utility scale cogeneration plant, 48,000 square foot plant, 15 megawatts. It was going to cost about $80 to $90 million. And we were very far down this road when I arrived at BMC. In fact, my first finance committee meeting here at the organization, it was on the agenda for discussion for potential approval to move forward. And at that time, I put the project on hold. If we go to the next slide. I put the project on hold and re-engaged with our discussions with Vicinity as well as Eversource, and started to really refocus our efforts on, could we drive down our loads rather than build a large utility scale plant that would continue to fund or supply power to the inefficient campus we had? Could we do a deep dive on our energy efficiency and also look at right sizing our campus? So look at the use of our square footage, and could we use our square footage more effectively and efficiently to serve our community? And the result of that was the campus redesign plan that we entered into and began work on in 2012. We go to the next slide. And the efforts from that over the next several years was extremely, it was actually more effective than I anticipated it would be when we started, to be frank. We were able to come up with a plan that reduced the total square footage of our campus by 10%. And during that time frame, our patient volumes were growing by 20%. However, we were also able to reduce our electric consumption from the grid by 40%, our overall steam consumption by 34%, and through a solar power purchase agreement, reduce our carbon emissions from all of our energy by 96%. And so we completed over 30 projects in virtually all of our buildings and really looked at how we could interconnect our buildings to be able to share some of our newest infrastructure to power or cool and heat some of our older buildings. And by leveraging all of those tactics, we were able to have this type of result. You go to the next slide. However, we then decided to circle back to cogen. Now that we had our loads under control, we still had in our minds a significant resiliency issue here at BMC. So although the steam supply has proven to be really remarkably reliable for us, we were at the end of Vicinity's pipeline, and we only had one pipe serving the campus. And so we saw it as a significant risk. So, and when you look at experiences down in New Orleans with Katrina, as well as in New York, and you learn from those experiences, we saw that hospitals that did invest in cogeneration were really able to survive those disasters more seamlessly than others. And for us, as the largest safety net hospital, I went down at the time and I visited the hospitals in Katrina and really learned from their experience, where for many people sitting at home watching that disaster on TV, it felt like the underserved populations of New Orleans were left to fend for themselves. What I learned is the reality was they didn't make the investments that were required in their infrastructure prior to the disaster. And we needed to make sure that that didn't occur to our population here in Boston. So if you go to the next slide, we looked at the Superstorm Sandy and learned from those initiatives. And what we saw is that hospitals that had cogen were able to essentially disconnect from the grid and stay operational for weeks at a time, whereas other hospitals that didn't have a cogeneration went without power and they had to actually fully evacuate their facilities. You go to the next slide. So we re-envisioned what our cogen plant would look like now based on the reduced loads here at BMC. And what we came up with is installing a much smaller 2 megawatt cogeneration plant on the roof of our Yaki building so that it would be high and out of the flood level elevations. It would also take no land area, which, as we all know in Boston, is extremely valuable. And we worked closely with Vicinity, Eversource, as well as the city of Boston in a partnership. And by working with the city, we essentially came up with the concept of building essentially a small microgrid where we would also use the cogeneration equipment to provide backup power to much of the emergency communications infrastructure would happen to be located on a building immediately adjacent to our campus. And so in an emergency, we can literally flip a switch and we can power up that equipment so that it could also stay fully operational for weeks or months if needed, even if the grid was down. When you couple the installation of the cogen with the energy efficiency work we did, we essentially reduced our loads coming off of the grid by a total of over 70%. Now the two megawatt unit is sized, as Bill mentioned earlier, it's sized so that it will use 100% of the heat, almost 100% of the time, so that it would maximize the efficiency of the unit. We wouldn't have waste heat that wasn't being utilized. In doing that, it doesn't generate all of the electricity or all of the heat needs we would need for the campus, but it does generate enough that we know we can keep our important inpatient buildings and the patient care areas that we know we would need in a disaster fully operational. Moving to the next slide, please. And so the project, we were able to essentially reduce the project from an $80 and $90 million project down to being a net cost of less than $10 million once you looked at the grants and incentives we were able to receive for the project by partnering with the city and Eversource. It pays for itself essentially in 8 years. And so, you know, I think for many people, you look at the rate of change and people want to wait for technologies to be developed before making these decisions, right? Because they are large investments. But the reality is change is continuing to accelerate. And if you wait for the change, you're going to be waiting forever. And so we really saw this as a way to balance making an investment that would be critical for our community and doing it in a way that we felt we'd get a return on that investment in a short enough period of time that, you know, if we needed to make further change after 8 years, we'd be able to be in a position to do that. Move to the next slide, please. By prioritizing the energy efficiency right out of the gate, we were essentially able to reduce the total investment in the cogeneration equipment from for BMC's share of that investment was going to be $26 million. And so we reduced that to under $10 million. The size of the cogen went from 15 to 16 megawatts down to 2 megawatts. The electric consumption off the grid, again, went down by 40%, and we're continuing to make efforts to reduce that further. Our steam consumption was reduced by 34%, and we're continuing to work with Vicinity and really look forward to continuing to try and create greener steam with the investments they're going to make in the future. During this time frame, I would also say that part of our decision of continuing to work with Vicinity and not look at trying to create our own fully independent heating source was the fact that they were making the investments to connect the Kendall cogen plant into the steam network and create greener steam for BMC. In total, we've been able to reduce our energy costs here at BMC by over $8 million every year. You know, and I like to put that into perspective for people that if you look at the cost of healthcare, that's the equivalent of about $150 million over a 20-year period of what we would not have to charge our patients for healthcare costs. And as I mentioned earlier, we were also able to liberate essentially a very high value piece of real estate, not just monetarily, but it's also highly strategic value. It's immediately adjacent to our campus. It allows for our future growth. And so we didn't have to tie it up with a large scale power plant. And so we have that to be able to essentially build a future inpatient facility or outpatient facility to care for our community. I can't stress enough how important the Vicinity and Eversource partnership has been, as well as the partnership with Green Ribbon Commission and the City of Boston. We meet with Vicinity and Eversource literally every week, and we're constantly going through what are the next things we can do, because the rate of change is so dramatic. It's not something you can look at once a year. It's something we're always kind of looking across our campus and looking at what are the latest technologies that are coming to market and how can we leverage those to continue our journey and try and get us to the 100% carbon reduction for all of our energy here at the campus.
Great, Bob. Thank you. That's a really inspiring story. I mean, I think that the moral to me is the greenest unit of power is the one you never have to build. You know, you basically got rid of the need for 14 megawatts. That's pretty great. Thank you. Really appreciate that. Maria, turning it over to you.
Thank you so much, John. And thank you to you and the Boston Green Ribbon Commission for hosting this event today. And it's been a pleasure to hear the other presentations. And so I'm going to be talking about our journey and looking at decarbonizing our energy system at Northeastern. Next slide. So at a high level, you know, we understand that it's commitment, looking at our energy on campus and how we power we have a host of buildings, over 8 million gross square feet. And many of those buildings are legacy buildings, as well as legacy infrastructure. And so we know that we have to establish near goals and long-term goals to advance not only technology, but really focus on policy changes and what do we need and what partnerships do we need to develop to advance changes in the industry that allows us to advance and further advance and meet the city's carbon-free Boston goals. And so it requires collaboration as us as a community. What are we doing to benefit our neighbors? What are we doing to benefit the city of Boston? And really, what are we doing to benefit the world itself, right? So next slide. So in order for us to really have change and think about it wholesale is understanding what's happening internationally, nationally, at the state level, at the local level. And so we want to make sure that as we're addressing not only the opportunity to update our grid and our campus and our district plan, but how can we do that in a way that advances other really important social and environmental issues. So thinking and looking at how we can integrate our design and our thinking around the UN's carbon goal or sustainability goals. There are 17 goals. Understanding what's happening at the national level, right? So in 2021, we're back into the Paris Agreement and, you know, advancing at a global level an initiative to have effect and change across all of our countries. And Northeastern is growing internationally. And it's important for us to understand how the US is viewed and what we take in our students and in our representation and in our research out to the world. And of course, just about a month ago, Governor Baker signs the climate legislation to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and to protect environmental justice communities. And an important thing that is within that is recently the university, the president, Aoun, signed the climate justice action initiative with many other universities. And so we are looking at not just updating our climate action plan, which is an older term, but we're calling our new plan a climate justice plan. And so next slide. So as we were looking at our plan and how to affect change, we knew and we know as an organization that partnerships are key. Where globalization of higher education, we are use-inspired research, experiential learning, and our partnerships with companies around the globe. And, you know, we are pushing ever more this notion of innovation in higher education. And we have to balance that with being one of the largest property owners in Boston, right? And so it's important to note that even though a portion of our gross square footage is part of a district plant, we have 8 million gross square feet that we have to make sure that we're understanding what's happening within each of those buildings and their energy consumptions and needs. And we want to do it in a way that we're good stewards and leaders within the city, within the community, on resiliency and sustainability, so that we can spread that knowledge and share that knowledge out. And it does require collaboration. And we've spent a lot of time reflecting about how we might be a leader in this challenging time. And so, and we want to make sure that we understand what role we play. Next slide. So I'm fairly new to Northeastern. My team is fairly new. Bob, you had mentioned, you know, having long-lasting relations with Bill and his team and with Eversource. We have had relationships with some entities, but for the most part, Northeastern is really an island. It is a true district plant that services Northeastern. And so what is important for us to do as we're thinking about planning this is we had to do a utilities master plan and understand what is the infrastructure in the state of our utility system on campus. And we also need to understand every building on campus, the age of it, what are the systems, so that we can design a solution that fits our portfolio. And we have, you know, a host of pre-war buildings all the way up to very brand new complex science buildings. And at the same time, Northeastern is advancing research, which requires a more building technology, requires the advancement of the Internet of Things and building systems that are smart, right? So we want to create a way to have smart buildings, not only with our brand new buildings, but how do we integrate that technology into our legacy facilities for better control of the energy? Next slide. So our current commitment, I'm taking you on this journey. Our current commitment is to reduce our carbon footprint by 80% by 2050. That goal was established in 2005. We have launched an update to our climate action plan. Again, we're calling it a climate justice plan. And our goal is to be carbon neutral by 2050 or sooner. So how do we, model our ability to redesign our new plant, revision our electrical system on campus to achieve the goal and be a model and leader in the city of Boston in being able to transform our energy systems. And so we currently are looking at a combined heat and power plant. And we're also establishing a microgrid. So what does that mean? We're planning on aggressive energy efficiency improvements. So across the entire portfolio, what do we need to do to update and conserve energy? We are exploring window replacements. Many institutions don't even consider windows because the return on investment is not very good. But it's the building envelope is a huge source of energy loss. And we are pretty passionate about how do we make sure that we can have impact in that environment. We're looking at on-site solar. And so having an opportunity to put some solar in on campus is very, very important to us. Solar generation requires large amounts of acreage in order to get large solar capacity. And so we know that we have to balance a solar system with purchasing wind, and also looking at battery storage on campus. And so we are designing a system that integrates all of those technologies so that we can not only increase our resiliency on campus, but also look to reduce our carbon use as well. Next slide. So thank you. And if you have any questions, again, throw them up in the chat. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Maria. I think that just really demonstrates what the opportunity is when your legacy system comes to an end. I think in a way you're really lucky that didn't happen a decade ago, because you might have built something totally different. So,
well, you know, it's interesting that, and I'll only take one more second, that, you know, we found through our exploration that, again, our boilers are at the end of their useful life. We're over capacity on our electrical grid. And it creates a really unique opportunity for us to really catapult. And Bob had mentioned, I heard him say, you know, how are we advancing these changes, you know, tenfold? And that's our vision. That's what we want to do.
That's great. Great. Brad, I'm going to turn it over for you to talk a little bit about how the district systems integrate in with the building emissions performance standard. It's all yours.
Thank you, John. It's really a pleasure to be here. Looking at my fellow panelists, this is a celebration of partnership. I've worked with everyone here for many years. Great to be with Bill DiCroce again. Maria Cimilluca and I've been really enjoying getting to know each other. Bob Biggio, what you've done at Boston Medical Center, you know, Boston's environmental building level work started with Boston Nature Center building way back in 2002. We called it the building that teaches. You're clearly the vanguard of the hospital campus that teaches, and hearing the summary of what you've done is just absolutely amazing. So I'm 8 weeks into work for a new mayor, Mayor Kim Janey, and in my second week, serving the Chief of Environment, Energy, and Open Space, Reverend Mariama White-Hammond. So I was delighted to hear the climate justice plan reframing from Maria, because equity and environmental justice will be at the absolute center of everything Boston does under this administration. And I'm very excited about that focus. So Boston, carbon-free Boston and the climate action plan, you know, in 2017, the city of Boston committed to a goal of carbon neutrality by 2050. We knew that we needed to understand where we were and how to achieve that goal. And so our partnership with the Green Ribbon Commission and the Boston University Institute for Sustainable Energy and the researchers and stakeholders across the city helped us to analyze greenhouse gas emissions in Boston and how to explore potential strategies to reach that goal. And that served as the basis for the 2019 Climate Action Plan update. And through that process, we identified critical actions we need to accelerate and ensure that we're on the path to carbon neutrality. And as mentioned, we worked with Arup on that work. So it's great to be with Arup as well this morning. The climate action plan, Boston's has 70% of our emissions come from the building sector. And, oh, next slide, please, I'm sorry. And we identified 8 major strategies in the plan directly related to accelerating building decarbonization. The first 3 cover new construction and major renovation. And we started with city-owned and city-supported buildings. We adopted net zero construction standards for new municipal buildings in December 2019. In 2020, we adopted net zero carbon standards for city-supported affordable housing. And we're right in the midst of developing new net zero zoning as well. The second set focused on existing buildings, investing in retrofits for all municipal buildings. Near and dear to my heart, the city's Renew Boston Trust is up and running. It's a comprehensive energy savings performance contract. Municipal Energy Unit administering it, an alternative finance unit managing the self-funded budget. We're up to about towards $40 million of self-funded work. It supported the city's issuance of its first green bonds, and we actually achieved a price differential for our green bonds compared to vanilla green bonds. And so we could not be more thrilled with the role of structured finance in an energy savings performance contract to help us with our municipal buildings. But now we're developing an emissions performance standard to put all large existing buildings on the path to neutrality. And this is what's relevant to our conversation today. This is a priority because a small percentage of buildings, our 2,000 to 3,000 largest buildings, account for nearly 50% of our building emissions. And the final pair focus on enabling actions, expanding workforce development pathways and opportunities, and advocating for state policies that align and support with our climate action. Next slide, please. So our climate action plan, looking at energy supply, we have a number of strategies on energy supply, from community choice electricity, which is the city's municipal aggregation program that my municipal energy unit administers, to an initiative specifically identifying our need to plan for the transition to carbon neutral district systems. Next slide, please. So in 2020 and early 2021, we performed extensive technical analysis and stakeholder engagement to develop a proposed emissions performance standard for existing large buildings. The proposed policy sets specific emission targets by building type that decrease over time in line with our carbon neutrality goals. We're pursuing a performance standard for many reasons, but of greatest importance is that it directly targets our largest source of emissions, the 70% that come from buildings. We also believe that giving long planning horizons and taking a technology agnostic approach gives owners the ability to appropriate time investment and the needed flexibility to choose strategies that are best for their building, as well as the technologies to account for rapidly evolving technologies. This will give us the flexibility needed to evaluate the most appropriate scale for intervention for different buildings. And for example, the climate and environmental planning team, ably led by my colleague, Allison Brizius, is working to allow for university campuses with a central plant to have its decarbonization strategy that may very well be very different than an individual apartment building or a supermarket. And that kind of internal specificity is still very much under development. So we're specifically allowing for system-specific emissions factors to be used for these systems to properly account for their emission profiles. And these are details that we hope to be working through with all kinds of various important group processes, not the least of which is the Green Ribbon Commission's commitment to work with stakeholders on the future of decarbonizing district energy systems. We are very interested in the AG's push for the Department of Public Utilities to look at the future of the natural gas industry. And of course, the Commonwealth is establishing a clean heat task force. And I just noticed a couple of days ago that they're hiring a program manager for that. So next slide. I've been at work on district energy microgrids that are combined heat and power based since 2013. And that really served as the basis for the city's smart utilities policy, which involves a number of technologies that aren't energy. We have green infrastructure, we have smart street lights, we have utilidor, other technologies are covered by the development review policy. But we are very focused on the opportunity for district energy microgrid efficiencies for clusters of buildings. In 2013, we were very focused on natural gas as an input for the trigeneration that was described so well at the beginning of the discussion. We have been studying how much this is an opportunity to decrease greenhouse gas emissions and energy and operation and maintenance costs, and of great importance on-site energy resilience. Next, please. But as the movement, general societal trends towards electrification and the concerns about the continued use of the fossil fuel natural gas inputs into a carbon-free Boston, we have been very actively decarbonizing the district energy microgrid strategy that is part of the smart utilities policy. So the Boston Planning and Development Agency Board updated the policy in 2020. We continue to require a feasibility assessment and master plan for projects that are 1.5 million square feet and above. This has been a very successful and important process for us to do a lot of internal education, a lot of education of the professional teams that support the design and development review work of major developments in Boston. One thing that I'm very pleased is that the energy and infrastructure planner position that I started to create at the BPDA in 2013 has been made a full-time position, permanent. And that person, Manuel Esquivel, is charged with really making sure that this decarbonization update of our district energy microgrid technology within the smart utilities policy coordinates with our climate action plan work. So this gives us the opportunity to, in an upfront way, really look at ground source heat pump, including this practice of demanding financial and technical feasibility assessments, and really working with city government and the Smart Utilities Steering Committee, which pulls together all the stakeholders of city government in a very effective way. Public Works, Boston Transportation, Boston Water and Sewer, led by the BPDA, supported by Climate and Environmental Planning and My Energy program. So I'm very excited that we're going to be able to really assess these changing technologies that are rapidly changing sewer heat recovery potential, and very much a focus on photovoltaic and battery storage microgrids. We do not see a future for us promoting from scratch natural gas input, combined heat and power, trigeneration, district energy microgrids in order to achieve the islandable microgrid reliability that is so important to us. So next slide. I think that's what I have. Oh, that's a photovoltaic installation on a community center, an early one. Under the Renew Boston Trust, we had a 245 kilowatt parking canopy at the Boston Police Department headquarters on Tremont Street in Lower Roxbury, right across from Maria's shop. If you ever want fun in project coordination, tell police officers that they can't park where they've always parked. They have guns.
I'm not taking that on. Thank you very much.
All right.
Great. Thank you, Brad. Really appreciate it. And thanks to all the panelists. What a great deep dive into district systems. We got about close to 20 minutes for questions. We have a whole lineup of questions. So Claire, if you can get the panelists in there in our grid view, that would be great. I'm gonna start it off with, there are a couple of questions related to the sort of transmission distribution planning for electrification. And Bill, I think I'll direct this to you. My understanding from your description is that the electrification strategy for Vicinity will require no transmission or distribution upgrade, because you've already got those wires in place and you're just reversing the direction of the electrons. Is that a fair take on what you're doing?
Yeah, I think it is. Well, we've looked at the modifications that are required at our plant. I said we have to install electric boilers. We also look at our interconnect, our switch yard, which is where our plant connects to the high voltage grid. We'll do some minor modifications there, but it's relatively minor. The infrastructure is there because today we can push out 300 megawatts of power. So it's already exists, which is the, really the striking part of our revelation that we could do this is we've already got the distribution network in the streets and we've already connected to the high voltage grid. We plug in the middle and go.
So,
And another point to make is, one of the challenges of electrification is, as Eversource and other local utilities know, is that there's challenges on trying to get infrastructure in place to eliminate methane and go electric. I mean, a lot of substations are going to have to be installed over time, and it's not easy. So in our case, we're already there. We're a 300 megawatt substation.
yeah, okay, that's a nice way to think about it. So,
Yep.
Another question was related to storage and whether there are any issues related to storage safety, and in particular, maybe Brad, this could also connect with you, whether the city is imagining that if there's more storage, we're going to have more kind of safety regulations around large scale storage. Bill, can you just start with that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, batteries, particularly, scale batteries, store a lot of energy. I know back from my days in way back when I trained guys how to run submarines, one of the most dangerous casualties that you looked at was a battery problem on a submarine. So they store a lot of energy. There'll have to be some more guidance. Will have to be cited. I mean, in our case, we've already got a pretty robust industrial facility. So we're not as worried about that. But when you're trying to place big batteries in city neighborhoods, it'll be challenging. But I mean, it can be overcome, but there'll be safety requirements for sure.
Yes, there's no question that municipal governments need to fully engage their fire department, and New York City is having a pretty challenging time with this issue. And in Boston, our energy and infrastructure planning program is absolutely trying to do this more systematically. I will say at this point, large scale battery storage installations and the fire departments and building department issues are being handled project by project. And our push is to get to sort of citywide standards that are just, more systematically applied. But, we do have the National Fire Protection Association right next door in Quincy. So I would say actually, John, as we think about the kinds of group discussions that are necessary for the decarbonization of district energy, that kind of engagement is absolutely critical. We do it, but again, it's very much project specific. I had to really intervene on a major battery storage on a particular hospital in Boston, and very, it was very project specifically intense. And so I think we should maybe reach out to the National Fire Protective Association in Quincy and get them fully engaged with the next steps of this Green Ribbon Commission group.
That's a great suggestion. And Bob, I'll go to you in a second. Both Beacon Capital and Boston Properties have tried to do storage facilities in New York City and have just run really afoul of the.
It's got to be solved.
It's been really,
and it's a municipal challenge.
And it has a huge benefit for peak demand charges and peak demand shaving. So we'll put that on our list to sort of figure out where we could go next. Bob, you were going to say something.
Yeah, so we will have our battery storage up and running in the fall here at BMC. And I will tell you, when we were looking to site it, we originally wanted to put it on the roof of one of our inpatient facilities next to the Cogen. After working closely with the Boston Fire Department, we decided, the lithium ion will burn right through concrete. And so we ended up siting it on the ground level adjacent to the power plant a bit further away. So.
There's other storage methods as well. I mean, for example, in our chill water district energy system in Baltimore, we use ice. So a little safer than, some of the more combustibles, but there's other storage methods, thermal storage batteries that use liquid salts as well. We're taking a look at that again, suitable for an industrial environment like ours, but there's other methods, and we'll just, have to find different to skin the cat.
Sort of a related safety issue, Bill, is so the industrial scale heat pump is kind of interesting. I don't think we have really any examples in the US of those.
We don't.
Any issues about negative impact on the Charles River, or is it actually an environmental positive to take heat out of the Charles?
No, I think, first of all, we got out of Charles years ago. We used to heat up the Charles. And we put a $30 million pipe across the Charles. So we take all that energy that we used to dump into the Charles and we heat Boston with it. So we already stopped adding heat to the Charles. And I think in this case, the amount we're talking about, although it will be sizable for us, say it's an 8 to 10 megawatt heat pump, our initial sense is that it will not be a challenge. We'll be removing some heat from the Charles. So we don't anticipate a great problem with that scale. The bigger challenge with those new industrial heat pumps is the refrigerant types. So they're using either something like pentane or hexane, which again, you're not going to get cited in a commercial building, but we think we'll be able to cross, hurdle, get over that hurdle in an industrial facility.
Oh, great. Thanks. So there was a kind of interesting question, I think it's a little bit at the intersection of Vicinity and the emissions performance standard, that which is like, so the emissions performance standard sort of puts the onus for performance on the building owners. And so given that, what's the incentive for the district system owners, to take this on when really it's the building owner's responsibility? And Brad, a sort of related question is, how are you guys thinking about treating the buildings that are linked to district systems where they don't really control the carbon emissions intensity of that?
Well, I'll go first. Just is what's our interest? They're our customers. So we're trying to take care of our customers and find it. And we think we found an easy button that will be a fraction of the cost, particularly on retrofit. Deep building retrofit to convert to heat pumps is expensive. And a bit painful. It's major surgery, if you will. It's kind of heart, artery, and capillary surgery when you really look at it, which we have. So we're trying to find, we're trying to be the easy button for our customers and advance, we can advance this decarbonization quickly and relatively painlessly, and our customers will get the benefit.
Great, thanks. Brad,
these buildings that are connected to Vicinity systems are part of the 85% of the buildings that are in the transitional bucket, and the carbon performance standard, looking at them, overarching, it's technology agnostic. And so we are going to need to continue to work very seamlessly with Vicinity, with the Commonwealth, with the utilities, and make sure that there's a common understanding of how fuel inputs are accounted, that it is something that building owners can count on in the long term. And this is just a reality. You're not a regulated utility in the same way that Eversource and National Grid are. And so, nailing down some of these carbon accounting issues are things that we're still going to need to follow through on. But the carbon performance standard is a technology agnostic standard, and with a time frame and a team at City Hall to help building owners work their way through what we're asking them.
Yeah, carbon accounting is interesting. We've had very productive recent conversations, though, with both Mr. Golden in the city's office, in the PPDA, and in Commissioner Woodcock's group, because we're just trying to get it right so that everybody's counting the same way. There's multiple established methods for counting, EPA, RGGI, GWSA, and it's fundamentally physics. So, but I think we've made very good progress very recently to just all get on the same page, so we're all counting the same way.
Well, I'm aware of those conversations, and I just would say that because building owners connected to your system are going to have to comply with our standard, it's just got to be fixed, and something that they can count.
Agreed.
Hey, Bill, that does raise a question that was asked, and maybe you can share this, is sort of to what extent are you or are you not regulated? You're generally referred to as an unregulated utility. So theoretically, sort of, there's not a DPU looking out for your customers. And so can you just explain your organization in terms of its regulatory structure?
Sure. So we're unregulated from a commercial perspective. So we just have to compete. We compete with, our customers can either do it with us or do it themselves. or go to another utility. So we're just, it's, you know, it's commercial. We are regulated from a safety perspective. So the DPU does regulate from a safety perspective. So they inspect, you know, we have inspection regime, manholes, pipes, so forth. So we are regulated on that front, but not commercially. We stand on our own 2 feet that way. So there's not a regulated rate of return. It's, we need to be competitive to be in business.
So there were a couple of questions related to the technologies, and one of them just came in, Rebecca, to you, which was sort of the, you know, the conversion of hot water. And I think Stanford is a sort of big, you know, example of that. Are there particular sort of lessons that you think we've learned on the hot water conversion from steam to hot water, and how that works and how it doesn't work?
Yeah, so there are examples out there, mostly in the higher ed sector, that have converted. Stanford is one. There's other systems that have primarily geothermal at a district level. Again, looking kind of across the Atlantic, there's also precedent for very deep geothermal, is what it's called. And serving, again, beyond even a campus scale, kind of a real utility scale. So the tricky part about the conversion is the steam pipes don't match the same load as the hydronic piping needs. So you need bigger piping to get the same load distributed. So that's really one of the largest challenges, is because it really presents a major infrastructure change to do so. That's not to say it can't be done. It's just a bit of a messier conversion to what Bill said. So that's probably the biggest challenge. And then also looking downstream with those steam systems in terms of that conversion is at the end use of the building, how are they using that steam? Have they already converted it to hot water, kind of at that point of connection with the district system, or have they not? Are they still actually bringing the steam to an air handler or an actual process use? So there's a lot more complications in that transition rather than having that drop-in fuel at the source and still maintaining the same distribution in terms of utilities.
So
Again,
sort of oh, go ahead. Go
I
ahead.
was going to say, we've had the whole mix, right? So we've had customers that were originally, you know, they've always had hot water loop, and we just have a heat exchanger. So we, you know, transfer heat from our steam network into theirs. We have hot water loops as well. We have people who convert, and then what we do is we add a heat exchanger. So they may have upgraded their own hot water loop, and we just add in a heat exchanger. So there are ways to convert in building or in, say, within a campus. The challenge becomes when you're trying to do major infrastructure replacements. It's very expensive to dig up city streets. You know, call it $4,000 a foot when you order of magnitude to dig up city streets. So it's if we can find a replacement like we're talking about to electrify and still use that existing infrastructure, all the better.
So this sort of triggered a related question that one of the participants asked, which is all of these big district systems are all serving basically some version of, you know, C&I customer, some version of commercial. Is there a residential application? As many of you know, we did a GRCx with Heat and Eversource and National Grid on network geothermal, so sort of geothermal districts. Is geothermal districts the real equivalent application to the residential side, or are there other potential residential applications that we ought to be thinking about?
So in our experience, energy density is where the economics work best, right? So you're in an urban core, you're in a campus. When you get to less energy dense fields, it's harder. But there's been a lot of advancements in cheaper piping systems, effectively flexible piping systems that come off a roll and go in the ground a lot cheaper. I mean, I think Denmark dramatically extended their reach of combined heat and power and district energy by doing that, and by pushing into residential. It does become more challenging. And I think there's actually a company in the Northwest that has done quite a bit on residential geothermal. So there's been some experimentation there as well. It just gets more expensive because of the energy density, the lack of energy density.
Well, one last question that will cover a couple of pricing related questions that people had. And so there were sets of questions about sort of the time horizon on when does what's the price point with hydrogen where it's actually replaceable? What's the price point? What's the price point on offshore wind, when does it get there? And are the options with something like, micro nuclear? Any feedback any of you want to say in terms of these pricing horizons and sort of how they roll out over time?
Sure, I'll make a leap at it. So hydrogen, it's not only price, it's volume. There's just not hydrogen infrastructure to move the amount of hydrogen and get it to the place where you need to, say, burn it. It can be burned today in most plants. Like I said, we're going to do a pilot with GE on our big combustion turbine. The challenge is volumes. So I think that's further out in the distance because it's a whole infrastructure replacement to try to get hydrogen. Now, the best part about districts is it's a lot easier to convert at a district than put in 1,000 hydrogen gas stations, right? Or 10,000 hydrogen gas stations. So central facilities will be the first place to adopt. Because if you can commit to a system like ours and change it to, to burn hydrogen, you're touching large swath. So I think conversion at districts is a great place to start. I will make one other quick note. I saw one of the chats come up. We thought we were going to be the first to announce this, our electrification story, and Vancouver beat us to it. So on March 10th, Vancouver, British Columbia announced a deal between BC Hydro and their big network in Vancouver, and they're going to do exactly what we're talking about. They're going to electrify with hydropower. So it's the beginning of, I think, a paradigm shift for us.
That's great to know. Vancouver's been a good partner with the city of Boston on a bunch of peer exchanges, so that might be worth touching base. So it is past a little bit past the hour, so we're going to bring it to a close. I just want to thank all of you again. This has just really been fun and fascinating, and we'll think about doing some follow-up on this in another year or so to check back in and see where folks are at. So thank you. Thanks to all the participants. If you could, Claire, put up the slide in terms of sort of our next GRCx is going to be, this is definitely for the energy geek world, I think. Our next one is going to be on decarbonization of wholesale energy markets. We're going to have Judy Chang, who's the Undersecretary for Energy with EEA, participate, NLX, and then one of the participants from the PJM Coalition, which is Coalition of Cities, working on wholesale strategies for the PJM ISO. That's going to happen on June 4th. You'll be getting an invite to that. So anyway, thank you very much, and we'll bring it to a close.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.